Bitcoin is well over $1,000 at the moment. Major surge. Kyle Rearden is with me to take a closer look at this because a lot of people aren't really aware of all that they should concerning Bitcoin. The date is January 2nd, 2016, and this is basically a top story. Kyle, what are your initial thoughts on these new developments?
Well, as a Bitcoin user myself, I was pretty dismayed over the past couple of days, really the past week or so, when every time I would open up my wallet, the price per Bitcoin has just been going up and up and up and up. And as of right now, as we're recording this, Bitstamp is reporting the daily Bitcoin price in US dollars as $1,023. So this is really a cause of concern for me as well as other Bitcoiners as to what's happening. So as what will be kind of shown on screen momentarily, there will be charts provided courtesy of bitcoincharts.com. And I would suggest really everybody take these to heart because it's important to not just understand what's been happening within the past week or so, but also understand over the past several years the fluctuations in Bitcoin's price at certain points.
Okay, so you say you're concerned others are celebrating like they just won the lottery. Explain the difference in perspective that people are having with regards to what's going on.
Sure. Every time the price per Bitcoin spikes, the speculators get all excited, right? Especially if they bought in to Bitcoin at a lower price and then it's like buy low, sell high, right? They're treating this cryptocurrency as if it were a stock, which of course, as many of the Bitcoin developers have said, and even the developers of the altcoins, which are Bitcoin's competitors, competing cryptocurrencies, have said you're not supposed to treat cryptocurrencies as if they were stocks. So yeah, right now the speculators are probably jumping for joy as the price has basically jumped. We're talking hundreds of dollars worth in terms of the value jumping within the past week or so. For those of us who care about alternatives to the Federal Reserve System in terms of having a stable, workable, truly free market and preferably sound currency, sound money. This is really disconcerting because what we really wanted to have was a stable currency that is outside the Federal Reserve System. And the Bitcoin experiment is basically, well, an experiment to try and see and make that happen in any real way so it can compete against the Federal Reserve notes. The problem here is that these wild fluctuations are really evocative of volatility that does not inspire user confidence, especially if you have people buying in at the high end, and then as the price goes down and it starts to stabilize, because Bitcoin has had periods of being stable, as the charts will show. It's just, I mean, the long-term stability is kind of the concern here, and so. If anybody knows what might have possibly caused this, I'd like to know. But it's very clear from these charts that something's happened within the past week or so to cause this volatility over the Christmas break.
Okay, so this is a 3-year high, and for those that don't know, this has become very popular in China the last few years. And I'm going to quote now from Bobby Lee, who is the chief executive of BTC China, one of the world's largest Bitcoin exchanges. It says we're seeing the aftermath of zero exchange rates run amok. So Bitcoin is a healthy reminder that we don't have to hold on to dollars or other currencies, which is subject to capital controls and loss of purchasing power. Rather, it's a new asset class. That is Bobby Lee. China is the source of the majority of trade in Bitcoin, and the devaluation of the yuan and fears over capital controls have contributed to the recent spike in the digital currency. And there's more you can find out. So, Kyle, a lot of people have looked at Bitcoin as like the thing for libertarians, independent, get outside the Fed. And here we see the rise in Bitcoin ATMs, and China's just scratching the surface. What is your reaction to that?
My reaction to that is that I don't like when other third parties with their own agendas like to muscle their way in and disrupt the experiment in cryptocurrencies to their own ends. Back in 2015, I wrote an article entitled Bitcoiners Betrayed, Lobbyists Sell Out to the Government. And in that shorter article, I explained how the Bitcoin Foundation on record had behind closed doors secret meetings with federal regulators, including but not limited to the IRS, the Federal Reserve, the FBI, FinCEN, DHS, and other alphabet soup boy administrative agencies, where essentially they were wanting to build relationships, their term, they wanted to build relationships with the federal regulators. So there have been attempts, what I'm trying to get across here is that there have been attempts by various different actors to subvert and trash Bitcoin as a workable concept of something resembling sound money, or at least a competitor to the Federal Reserve System. So I'm not surprised when you read what you just did regarding the Chinese. It's like, okay, well, it's just, I mean, just more people just trying to kind of upset the experiment and prevent something resembling a truly free market currency in this digital age from competing against the Federal Reserve System and central banking.
Okay, do you think that it started out then on a better footing than where it is now? Then do you see rather the situation now as something where Bitcoin's been corrupted, where perhaps it was, on a different route?
Absolutely, and it's not just my opinion, because Cody Wilson, who's also a local Austinite here, who gained prominence for Defense Distributed, that organization of his, which of course gained notoriety for being able to 3D print firearms and then distributing those CAD files over the internet so people can also 3D print their own firearms. Cody Wilson was involved at one point with the development of Dark Wallet, which was an attempt to make Bitcoin truly anonymous, or at least as close to anonymous as possible. And he was mentioning in many of his public statements about how the Bitcoin Foundation in particular was subverting and otherwise trying to sabotage the workability of Bitcoin such as it is. So, I mean, so whether it's the Chinese or federal regulators or anybody else, there's some pretty interested actors who want to make sure that we don't have a workable cryptocurrency for the people.
It is possible that the whole thing may have been set up. I know that's not a very popular opinion from the get-go to track currency. So one of the things that I'm thinking about when you tell me about all these groups coming together is to get that data, is where my imagination takes me, where the money is. Because there's a lot of capital controls happening with banks right before that. Again, lots of concerns about economic collapse as soon as Obama came in, and announcements in 2009, 2010, only so much money being allowed out of the country, and people start freaking out, preparing for economic collapse. And then boom, Bitcoin kind of came out of the woodwork. And what I feel is something that's been constantly offered, the easy way out, just that simple, just create a wallet. So I've always been skeptical of something made so easy. Just a little bit of additional detail from The Guardian. It does say that market watchers have suggested that the soaring value may have been boosted in the past year by increased demand in China on the back of a 7% fall in the value of the yuan. So whether they're trying to destabilize it or make it still very popular, I mean, this may not be the death of Bitcoin. It seems like it's going to be around for a while. And whether it was intended or not, it does seem to be like the stock market kind of a thing right now, with its own source of inflation and deflation. It's like, technically that's why people were talking about getting away from the dollar, weren't they? All this inflation, deflation, only to see, or am I wrong in looking at this that way? So I look at Bitcoin, I'm seeing the same type of, well, even more so. I mean, wild fluctuations, like it's a stock market party right now on Wall Street.
Well, unfortunately, it does kind of mimic that, right? So on that point, let's look at these different charts. So for the first chart, which is basically the past month or so, or image one, if you will, you can see that pretty much in the past week, and definitely right around Christmas, December 24th and 25th particularly, it really kind of shot up from about $900 per Bitcoin to now where it's basically 1,000. And then earlier in December, it was kind of hovering around roughly between $760 to, let's say, $820. Now, if we go to another image, this would be going back to about 3 months ago, so like October 7th, kind of see that Again, this would be more $700, a little bit going lower, like $650, $600, and so forth. But again, you can still kind of see that upward trend with the sharp spike right around Christmas. Going to the next image, this would probably be image 3. This is going back about 6 months. And even 6 months back, so this would be going to like last summer, like July, you can kind of see, especially for the viewers, you can kind of see how even before December, but it's still pretty stable in that 600 area. And there was a sharp dip to about 500 right around August, but then it went back up to about 700 or so. So it was stable for like the past 6 months or so. That's kind of the point here. Going on to the next image, which I guess you could say image 4, this would be going back about a year. So this would be going back to when the status turf war in Oregon was happening with the Malheur Refuge and that kind of situation with the Bundys and so forth. So even going back to that period, again, Bitcoin is about $500, $400 or so. And so a little bit lower, but it's still, there's no like sharp spikes or anything like that. Onto the next chart, if you look at, let's say chart 5, this would be going back about, I think about 2 years or so, to January 15th of 2015. Again, that whole last year, again, it's $400, $300, hovering sometimes at $200, but let's just say $300 roughly from the chart per Bitcoin. So yeah, I mean, there's hardly anything, and it's more stable than not. Now the last chart, let's call it image 6, if you will, goes back 4 years, and this is probably the most important one. So you can kind of see, especially on the left-hand side of the graph, where when we go back to 2014 and even 2013, you can kind of see these wild swings. So for example, in, I think this is 2014, there was that, really, I guess you could say that what was termed a flash crash, if I remember my history right, where it was kind of almost evocative of what happened in Holland many centuries ago with tulip mania, which people should look up if they don't know about tulip mania. But basically what happened here with Bitcoin is that the price just dropped. It flash crashed was the term that was coined. Basically virtually down to zero or pretty close. And then it kind of had to be built back up. So that's why you see those really wild swings. And through that first quarter or so of 2014, it's really kind of up and down. And all, I mean, you see the kind of like these really jagged, price fluctuations. And then going into the very beginning of 2015, it stabilized at about $200, $300 per Bitcoin. So 2014 was a very volatile year. But then when you look at 2013, with the far left side of this last graph, you can kind of see Bitcoin really being worth almost nothing, where it's mainly hovering around $100, $200 right up until the end of the year, where it just starts sharply spiking. So what I'm trying to say is that depending where Bitcoin users are on these upswings and downswings, people can really get hurt by this. And again, my concern is not so much whether the speculators are profiting or losing out. My concern more is about long-term Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency being stable. And so I guess the question everybody really needs to kind of consider here is what monetary value its exchange value, what you can buy and buy with Bitcoin as well as receive as Bitcoin for stuff you sell, for example. What's the monetary value of a cryptocurrency like this, where its valuations can, just be stable for a while? Yes, in some years, but in other years, it's just going all over the place.
Was this anticipated that Bitcoin would go in this direction, or was it anticipated or assumed that Bitcoin would be more stable in its price?
The Bitcoiners, let's call them the faithful, as it were, even more faithful than me, because I've been very public about my criticisms regarding other elements of the Bitcoin ecosystem, as it's called. The faithful Bitcoiners have presumed that it would be stable. Now, the degree to how much it would be worth in terms of Federal Reserve notes is kind of a different question. But the point is that they always intended it to be a currency. So it's something that you can exchange, or even one of the later developments in Bitcoin, which has been going around for I think 2 years or so now, is being able to buy and sell or otherwise exchange Bitcoin for precious metals like gold and silver. So buying the gold and silver with Bitcoin, or as well as the other way around, selling Bitcoin for gold and silver. And there's more businesses that are now providing those exchange services to where you're not even touching Federal Reserve notes at all, which is a wonderful development. But, it's a little hard to use methods like that if the cryptocurrency you're relying on to exchange in gold and silver as a workaround the Federal Reserve System has these wild price fluctuations at seemingly random times.
Right. What goes up must come down. So what is your projection or concern, or where do you think things are going to go from here? And as opposed to where are others? Are others seeing what's happening as a good thing, and what are their projections?
Yeah, I've been kind of at odds with most of the Bitcoiners for a variety of reasons. But to keep it simple for the purpose of this particular shorter podcast, I'll just say this. The faithful really want Bitcoin specifically as a cryptocurrency to never be lost, to never be defeated by the Federal Reserve and the federal government more generally, and so forth. And so, it's they kind of view Bitcoin as their poster boy, their savior, messianic figurehead, if you will. Even if in the long run it turns out, perhaps, that such faith was misplaced. On the other hand, my perspective is sympathetic but different, mainly, which is this. I really want cryptocurrencies to actually work. And what most people don't talk about, Alex, is the fact that there are competitors to Bitcoin, collectively referred to as altcoins, that I think some are not as good as Bitcoin, to be sure, but there's other ones that are noticeably better. Hell, there's a cryptocurrency in development right now that uses line commands and is not user friendly, but it's called BIPcoin, BIP, BIPcoin, which is an attempt to try to bring back what was known as the dark coins, which were those subset of altcoins that were truly anonymous, or at least as close to anonymous as possible. So I think that other competitors, whether it's like Freecoin or other ones, but probably perhaps BIPcoin, are going to be much more important going into the future. And especially when Bitcoin is going through these wild price swings, I think there's going to be a greater market demand for altcoins more generally in order for a more stable exchange use value.
So there was another company or cryptocurrency, I guess it would be another altcoin, called Dogcoin that I heard of several years ago. How does that compare to Bitcoin?
I think you mean Dogecoin. Dogecoin is basically a joke. It's I would rather trust something like Ethereum at this point. I mean it was kind of like, oh, you have the picture of the dog, the Doge, on there. Ha, that's interesting. Okay, now let's get serious and use Bitcoin again. So if you're talking something specifically like Dogecoin, I wouldn't really waste any sort of time or effort or money in that kind of thing. And rather, I think the future is going to go more in the direction of altcoins more generally, and for my own personal preferences, dark coins. That subset that the dark coins like BIPcoin and others, where the focus is on making the cryptocurrency as anonymous as possible, as opposed to Bitcoin, which, although to be fair, the blockchain itself is unique as a open public ledger system. Unfortunately, and apparently there's some other more libertarian podcasts, Alex, that some of my readers and just colleagues I have been linking me to, where the trend that I seem to have started with, hey, go look if you want to learn something about Bitcoin and both its good and bad aspects, but especially the public ledger system itself, the blockchain. Go look up Stefan Molyneux's Bitcoin wallet and see how many Bitcoin he has that are to the tune of they're worth to the tune of like six figures. I mean, last time I checked, it was approximately like $200,000 worth, but obviously it's more now, especially in light of the recent inflation.
Are you telling me this Molyneux character has something set up to show off his bling?
But it's not just him; it's everybody who has a Bitcoin wallet on the blockchain. Because again, it's an open public ledger system. Anybody can look at it as long as you have the direct wallet, the Bitcoin wallet address. you go check up on the blockchain, and I've showed people how to do this in private conversations. You go look it up, and you can see what anybody has, whether they have a lot or a little. Molyneux would obviously be a lot, but
Well, I'm curious, how well would one of these blockchains hold up against a massive solar flare that would be affecting massive infrastructure? Is there a way that it can kind of imprint itself into the walls of the matrix so everybody knows how much everybody had?
Well, that's a very interesting question. There have been people who have been worried that, like, what if the government or even just random so-called hackers manage to take down the websites that
Right,
actually
or
host the
hackers.
that host the blockchain or portions thereof. And that's obviously been a concern that's never really been answered up until recently, where the developers of Bitcoin are also right now in development of a kind of similar project, which is called .bip, which is an attempt to set up a brand new internet domain type, which is called, well, .bip, where they're using it more like as a censorship-resistant tool. So mirroring a lot of websites that would end instead of a .org or a .net or a .com, instead as a .bip, and those website domains would actually be hosted on what would technically be a completely separate blockchain. So you're right for answering that question. That's been a concern, but really up until recently, like this past year or so, nobody's really addressed it. So that's where kind of things are at the moment.
Well, I've been offered 1/10 of 1/10 of 1/10 of 1/10 of a Bitcoin. I'm told it's worth $10. So, yeah, I don't know if I want a slice of a slice of a slice of a piece of pie. I want the whole Bitcoin. But what I can say is I don't have a Bitcoin wallet set up, and maybe I'll get one set up in the future. But most of the people that I have noticed in my particular demographic have chosen to donate with cash. So I've never actually got involved in cryptocurrency. Maybe I've become a little superstitious. I don't, want to. It's not so much in defending the dollar. It's a major hesitation to see this as a tangible alternative solution, let alone something that would defeat the systems of control. But you're still optimistic, though, that there are still some benefits of cryptocurrency, if not Bitcoin, but some of the other altcoins. So what are your last thoughts on this, solutions, where you think things will go from now?
I would say that there's been one misconception a lot of people, even Bitcoiners, have, and I would like to correct that right now. Most proponents and opponents of Bitcoin specifically have said things along the lines of, well, wait a minute, in order to use Bitcoin, I have to use Federal Reserve notes to buy the Bitcoins and then, then buy other things with Bitcoins. Well, that's like a two-step process. That's stupid. Why not just pay for things in cash, the FRNs and all that? And that's really a misunderstanding. It's not about, I don't think people really should be buying Bitcoins. I always thought that was a bad idea, and I've never, ever, ever, ever have done that myself, even if it did turn out Bitcoin was a bad deal in the long run. What I have always suggested to people who want to start using Bitcoin is learn how to earn Bitcoin, get paid in Bitcoin, and then either pay for things in Bitcoin from that point, or use certain methods like I've experimented with, and at some point I would like to write an article about this, but basically use Bitcoins to buy gift cards, which are denominated in Federal Reserve notes, of course, to buy gift cards and then use those gift cards as if they were money. And that way, except for the gift card itself, you're not actually taking whatever Federal Reserve notes you originally have and putting it in Bitcoin. I've always discouraged people from that. I've always encouraged, go get paid in Bitcoin. Ask whether it's your employers or if you're freelancing or whatever kind of, however you make your livelihood. Earn the Bitcoins first and then spend it or convert it into gift cards or even invest in precious metals. Or whatever you think is valuable, because I think that's a lot better. I've always discouraged people from, even when Mt. Gox used to be around, and they're not anymore. Even when Mt. Gox was around, I've always discouraged people from using the Bitcoin exchanges in the sense of converting their FRNs to Bitcoin. And it was also a privacy issue as well, mainly because, Alex, those different Bitcoin exchanges demanded and required on their websites in order to process the requests driver's licenses, and in some cases even social security numbers, which they're not supposed to do. So yeah, there's been more than one reason, not just a financial one. There's also a privacy reason why I've always discouraged that. So if people earn their Bitcoins or even other altcoins and then they either use it as money or they exchange it for gift cards or precious metals or something, I think that's a lot better way to go. But I would advise people to not heavily invest strictly in Bitcoin, because not just recently, but also more historically going 4 years back, there have been periods of quite a bit of volatility. So for example, just to pose a hypothetical before we close out here, if, for example, you do get paid in Bitcoin for some freelance work, and then let's say the market decides to get a lot more volatile, and let's say it goes against your interest, you could actually lose out a bit depending on when you get paid, the time between you got paid and the time you actually use your Bitcoins. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Gotcha. So Bitcoin is a means to an end.
Yeah.
If anything, you can move it, the energy, the currency from one to the other, but it's not necessarily something that is in a static state of being. It's in a state of flux, and definitely want to stay one step of the game. And I'll consider getting it maybe a Bitcoin wallet in the future. Kyle, thanks for being with me.
Always good to be with you, Alex.
Cute.